Well, hello, and I'll talk a little bit about closure, and you'll find links on the blog to Scott McCloud's book, where you can read a little bit about understanding comics, and then look quickly over some images and ideas from the second part of our graphic novel. All right, this one talks to you a little bit about the closure, and I've talked about you've seen what happens between the gutters. It doesn't sound romantic, but the gutter is where a lot of things take place with respect to the viewer, reader, and what goes on. This is one of the great things about comics, this important role that we play as viewers as we're making sense of what happens when we go from panel to panel. And you see there's a limbo in the gutter, and a human imagination takes two separate images and transforms them into a single idea. And this is really one of the primary things about what goes on as we reach conclusions that we can change, because we look at the images, we look at the juxtaposition, and we come to terms with the visual iconography. The vocabulary of comics, in the vocabulary of comics, closure is, as he says, grammar. Keep that in mind as you read. And I've really kind of reinforced this for you, this whole idea as we go through, and the interaction between that space is of tremendous importance, because that's where we get involved in making meanings. So uh, be thinking in terms of closure. Now, a lot of McCloud's ideas, people may argue about them, but one of they don't is this idea of the closure of electronic media is continuous, largely involuntary, and virtually imperceptible, but not in comics, where we fill in now you die, no, no, and we have a scream. And as he says, that Cloud says that we become an equal partner in crime, known as the reader. But he said, everybody participates. Who reads? All of you participated in the middle. All of you held the axe and chose your spot. And so when you're going through and looking at the different panels, be thinking of the way that how closure in comics fosters an intimacy surpassed only by the written world, a silent, secret contract between the creator and the audience. All right, and I like this, that how the creator honors that contract is a matter of both art and craft. And so we'll see some of that as you go through and look at the ways that we go back and forth on this one, from one image to the other throughout the recording, as you make meanings and bring about closure. I like this back and forth here. The embarrassment, though, is over the other another stereotype, perhaps, all the part of what Danny tries to escape, and we can see the symbols of exasperation here. And here, part of it is upon, and the laugh track, of course, how the stereotype of the Asian who knows all the answers and studies all the time. And of course, on this one, Dan wants in the right panel and must run from the left. Note the visual separation, the panels that the separation that he's feeling and doesn't want to feel, the visual underscores. And of course, Danny sees himself basically as white, or wants to, and the stereotype of all that he's trying to escape. This panel pretty much speaks for itself, but again, the underhanded, the Chinese pea in the can. But I put this here because of what will come up later, and then remember with the barf, the loud sound, and the peeing, and what Chinky did. I like this one, that the laugh tracks here continue, and the panels making fun of eyes. The balloons with the hyphenated breaks suggest whispering, but we come to realize visually again that Danny reacts as though they speak of him, what he fears most, his loss of an artificial identity. Now we see again the back and forth here is that underscores visually this lack of communication between what he says and what he thinks that she says, and sort of this qui pro quo, that they're not communicating. And I've loved the teenage kind of thing. We just want to be friends, and he's whatever. But notice the I'm not like him. That reminds you of Monkey all the way back. I am not a monkey. And look here at this laugh track that continues when Danny's not there. And, I mean, he fears that he resembles, of course, Ching Ki. But it's beautifully done. All the thing with the teeth, that he tries to hide, and she's saying, well, I know a ornithologist, and look at the laugh track, look at the laugh track, and think of what that juxtaposition does in terms of closure. And now we find Danny to be what he wants to be, what he has fled, which is Chinky, and with the idea now that you know who he is, he's himself. And then here you have the friendship, and then looking into the eyes here, nice graphically, is of interest because we're wondering, and then he comes along for one of his visits and ruins everything. This is an interesting one visually. This reaching out in friendship. Come on, don't worry about it. I'll buy you a Coke. And then again, we have that laugh track in there. That's the reminder of what before, but also, as I pointed out to you, the whole that one full thing where it's talking about peeing. He peed in the Coke, and here you have it again. But who is the I there that Danny's thinking that he sees is of some interest? Well, I guess you don't need too much here. I just love the straight-fisted and walking away on this full page, and we're supposed to see. And here is the closure coming in here. We have to determine what is on Danny's mind at this time, and of course the reminder of the throwing up from a previous panel. And now we switch back to Monkey and Monkey's story, and here we have the good person of no particular talent. I love the visuals here and the idea of the transformations here with the gods. And this is not a new story of the gods coming down and testing. Zeus is the god of hospitality, which just seems like a small thing, and is always testing to see if people have the basics of civilization. And here is the good person, and I love the panels of another of the transformations. And he's going to go on his mission and get his disciples and go with his gifts. But we have to first find Monkey. Nice visuals here to suggest passage of time, and we have the wonderful landscape and the dangers about which the gods wandered. But the panels silently can let you know that he's on his mission, and you see the bags there, and of course crossing mountains and more mountains to cross. Well, we don't need silence. It's sometimes golden here. Note how the images and the word bubbles suggest his wait a minute reaction here about what's not holding him back and how he can find himself, if you will. I like that look on Monkey's eyes. Well, no need for comment here. It's kind of reminiscent of some Hong Kong kung fu films, but we have the disciple of the creator, whom Monkey will eventually serve, and he's been thinking, and then you see he's looking, and so you fill in closure about what might be going on in his head, and then the result is Sai, another transformation after 500 years, and is dusting off ready. And now you see the emphasis is going to go not for himself, but for serving something else, because he will fight for something other than himself. And the mix of comedic with the serious here, but in line with stories of Monkey, who use all kinds of things, great and small, to win a fight. And in here, it's the lower bodily functions, of course, but as I said, it is a fine mixture as we read through our stories of the serious and the comedic. And here, I love this, is leaving shoes behind. The idea he's discovered himself is presented symbolically. Again, that closure. But notice the Monkey King accompanied him, Wang Laizhou, on his journey to the west and served him faithfully until the very end. And then you have this iconic image here, if you're thinking, wow, that looks like the Star of Bethlehem, well, that is a kind of a public symbol, and there are different kinds of icons that comic or sequential artists use to get us thinking about what kind of voyage it is on, and that thinking will find reinforcement later on in the story. And here, there's the idea he wants to go on a date, our heroes and his good friend, and part of what this story is about concerns friendship. And here I love the closeness together to see one who looks more stereotypically Asian, if you will, and the other who's trying to be Americanized, but help out. And friends help out. And here we have two. I like this in the The images contrasting here, you have speech bubbles, and also you have those, um, what should we say, rectangular um, speech places that really indicate this is the voice of the narrator. And this is the other cultural pressures from parents and relatives. I was forbidden to date until I had at least a master's degree. And this is another kind of the pressures that you're beginning to feel that the protagonist is under, but is also telling you a story. And of course, part of that story is just he's uh, getting his desire here. But also now remember that what we have here, and these rectangular frames are an important reminder of this, there's different kinds of speech bubbles, and we can see that we have a first-person narrative. And so the speaker, supposedly our broccoli-haired guy, is relating to us things that happen in a sequence, out of sequence. And pictorially out of sequence, we think there are a number of stories which will eventually all coalesce into one story. So we have it broken up not only temporally but also visually. And of course, we have the friendship once we find out who his friend actually is. But the idea of you owe me, because he's done something. He lied, talked to the mother, and made possible for him to go on a date that he was forbidden to go on. So friends get involved in these kinds of things, but the you owe me is of importance. Well, the wonderful world of teenage fantasy here. I love the not only the love and the baby carriage and all that goes with it, but I love the pink in the bubbles. This is a light color of fantasy that Jen is set up now. And again, one of the other things we can do pictorially with this sequential art is uh, between the panels, that gutter, and by jamming things together through juxtaposition, we create stories. And so you see now, right after this, we have that certain grim reality. And notice the two of them look so much alike, and they're completely different. The hair, I mean, here, and going up and telling Jin, you can't go out with her. We don't want, I'm worried about who she's seen with. And then there's the reinforcement completely. And what a wonderful panel at the end there of him alone. Really well done, I think. Um, that we can feel there's emotions involved in this alienation that the poor guy feels, and look at that look of complete befuddlement on his face and the emotion here. It's always the anger that we've seen similar emoticons, if you will, and the bell and all these other things like a big this kid, of course, is completely the anger building. We have underscoring images and love and emotion here created, translated visually, if you will, in that last panel. Well, that says a lot. Things are definitely falling apart. This scene, a union of despair, perhaps an isolation, not only that we have no words at the end here, but look closely at the faces. And I'm not going to suggest what that means about the faces. Is there a unification? What's going on here? We know that that's Jin's best friend's girlfriend. But there looks like this union just sitting there with nothing. Um, I really enjoy this particular scene for that very despair. Well, a bad idea, and we wonder what he'll do at this point with the tears there and her own, someone called him Chink, and we have the zinc, the big idea that goes in there. What do you do? And we would like him to do something other than perhaps take advantage of his best friend's girlfriend's vulnerability, and of course he doesn't do that and ends up with one blackened cheek, and the boyfriend, his best friend, will fix the other. Now, the repetition of words can play a huge role in the story, and you can also recognize the words visually. And of course, what happens here is repeating, the teenager, Jin, repeating what got thrown at him and in the other direction. And this rupture, we find out retrospectively later on, causes huge problems between the two friends. But uh, the idea is, what do you expect of a teenager? Maybe I don't think you're worthy of her. Maybe she can do better than an FOB like you, and you can go back and look to the beginning, fresh off the boat, and what the blonde-haired kid said to him. I think everybody appreciates this transformation. I love his two bruises and his dreams, and I like it. At around midnight, 3 in the morning, I finally believed myself. Again, now this is written retrospectively. This is later on. What happens in a first-person narrative, you always have at least two narrators, and here we see them visually, as will come apparent. We've been seeing them visually throughout, but this one, the rectangular words are of the experienced narrator who's already gone through all this stuff and is relating it retrospectively. By the end, we come with the experienced, and the experiencing narrator will join towards the end. And the process of it here in this full page takes us all the way back to around 27 to 30. You can look in there and, with the whole idea of selling your soul. And remember that, so little friend, you've done it. He knows what he's done. And then in the rectangular language, I dreamt of the herbless wife. So there is this sense of self-delusion without a doubt. But what he gets is what he wants, so that there is really in the back of his mind, he knows what he's done. And note here, too, the new face, and it's all in parentheses in the rectangles. But notice at the bottom there, we finally have Jin turned into Danny. What he sees himself as and what others sees himself as, there can be contrast, but then you got to ask yourself, and this is all in what we were talking about in the beginning, closure, what the heck do you make of that laugh track at the bottom of the image? More fighting, and with the humor of the wet willy and whatnot, and this is the ending when Danny and Chinky are have their confrontation, and you have that one on, leading up here into a series of transformations that dominate the imagery of the final panels in our story. And the again losing the head, but also that between the panels are thinking about what is the significance, and also the ha 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 as the heads rolling down to reveal who Ching Ki was all the time. And this not only brings together the Monkey King dramatically and visually into what goes on here with the transformation, and again we've seen him going one way and the other, but also to be where what goes on, I think anyway. We have Danny here, we have the Monkey King, and Monkey has invaded literally again. Before we didn't know who he was. He's always been there, the narrative. And so there is the question of how do the mythological stories relate to contemporary uh, life. And we've seen often in talking about mythology and talking too about like fairy tales, that the question is, how do we make the tales so that they relate to us today? And here we have Danny losing the broccoli hair, losing the blonde hair, the eyes changing up there, which is why I focused previously on that one panel. You can see these relationships. Um, Now we have the actual character, the actual Monkey King, and the question is, how do these stories relate? How does one narrative stream affect another? Towards all the different jinns, we have Monkey's story that he's going to complete for us in a bit, and the closure asks us to make sense of all these different unions and transformations. Remember the biblical that looked like the Star of Bethlehem. I stood in His holy presence, and the holiness of the Father of the universe and everything. And here's a potential 2,000 years later. This is the kings bringing gifts to the baby Jesus on their journey to the west. So there's a gift to the Magi, a unification potential of East and West. Who knows? But clearly these iconographic images on the right of the panel in particular are rather startling. Well, we're back now to the transformer that the boy brought with him, goodbye, my son. And after all the wisdom for 2,000 years and everything like that, cannot uh, make certain what happens to people. But here it is: take this with you, and then remember to remind you of who you are. And then another connection between our protagonist and the son of a god, basically, the Monkey King. And here is I told you about the story of betrayal. And these are, all teenagers are in revolt. The revolt. Wei Chen is just like Jin Wang, and that's one of the things I like about the story in here, the image-wise of the son with turning the back on the father and everything, just the same way his friend did, if you will, through images. You supply the story. So look through at the end here. I like the way the eyes are all looking. I've come to serve as your conscience, as a signpost to your soul and to the other one's souls. And how are we going to make reconciliation here? The images are very nice. And Jin Wang looks younger and younger all the time in these areas. Yes, the signpost to your soul. And pointing on that panel, okay, what is the significance of this image? And there's that dynamic involvement between the viewer, the reader, and the image of making meaning. Yep. So what do you want me to do? And here is how you can have the significance here visually and with the wording. And I like the image. Look at that lower right hand panel and looking at the eyes. How can Monkey's story relate in the real world, his culture, to his particular situation? That's part of what's going on, I think. Oh, I do like the film technique here, the perspective, uh, going up to Hegman with a signpost for righting wrongs, perhaps. Uh, we don't want to read too much into it, but there's this part going on. What does that mean, and where is he going to go? There is a certain reconciliation here, of course. Parents, we finally see them, the ones who came from Japan and waited, China, and are pressuring him to be one way or the other, or at least he feels that way. This is the part where he turned his back on earlier, and we see visually here, at least, inside the house, under the roof, that um, he's back with his family, and he is perhaps the way they always viewed him. We don't know, because the the focus has been on him. He's telling the story. Nice visual transformation, potentially hopeful images of the monkey. I met your father, Wei Chen. I want to talk, and these series of images of the two people affected in similar ways, and these two, well, they obviously have a lot to talk about. So you have the final closure of the story, which isn't closure because we don't know what happens after this. That's not part of the story. The whole story has led, perhaps they're smiling, they're having tea, they're looking more and more like they were in the beginning. So we have a nice ending in part.